Surprise, motherfucker.
With Dexter Resurrection being just around the corner, the hype for the new show is real, and it's kind of wild that a show that ended in 2013, centered around a blood spatter analyst / serial killer, has made such a huge comeback in these last few years. First with Dexter New Blood and Dexter Original Sin. But here we are, waiting for a third spin-off. And with all the announcements about the cast and crew from the original that we will be seeing in this newest spin-off, what better time than now is to revisit one of Dexter's best adversaries from the original show, the Trinity Killer. You know how they say that evil hides in plain sight, but what if it mows the lawn? What if it teaches Sunday school, builds homes for the less fortunate, and also buries children in their foundations? That is exactly who Arthur Mitchell was. A man who by all appearances was an American dream personified, a devoted husband, a caring father, a charitable man who built homes through his organization 4 Walls, 1 Heart. But on the inside, he was a walking trauma spiral with a hammer and a god complex. Speaking of Arthur, it is impossible not to talk about the origins of his trauma from way back when he was just a 10-year-old boy in Tampa, Florida. One day, Arthur accidentally walked in on his teenage sister Vera in the shower. Startled, she slipped, shattered the glass door, and fatally severed her femoral artery. A freak accident? Yes. But in a household built on blame, it was branded on Arthur's soul like a scar that never healed. From then on, everything changed. His mother, consumed by grief, retreated inward and eventually succumbed to depression. 2 years later, after the family moved to Miami, she climbed out a window and ended her life. Arthur, still a child at that point, was left alone with his emotionally unstable, physically abusive father. It all came to a head when Arthur pushed to his limit, picked up a hammer, and killed his father. It was the third death in a chain that would define him forever. These 3 traumatic events, his sister's accidental death, his mother's suicide, and his father's murder, became the twisted blueprint for his future crimes. And long before he was the Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell was a broken boy trying to make sense of unbearable pain. And unfortunately for his future victims, he found meaning in repetition. That is how his ritual was born, because Arthur didn't just kill, he choreographed. Every murder for him was an elaborate reenactment, a symbolic resurrection of the tragedies that haunted his past. His killings weren't random. They were rituals, and like any other ritual, they followed a strict and deeply personal order, born out of childhood trauma and a desperate need to reclaim control over chaos. For the longest time, it was believed that the so-called Trinity Killer took 3 victims per cycle, hence the nickname. But that was only half the truth. Trinity didn't kill in 3s, he killed in 4s. 1 victim remained hidden from investigators for years, until Dexter, with his dark expertise, uncovered the final piece of the ritual. However, the cycle always began the same. A young unmarried woman would be found dead in her bathtub, her femoral artery slashed. It was an eerie mirror of Arthur's sister Vera's accidental death. Next, a mother of 2 would be coerced into jumping from a high place, echoing the suicide of Arthur's grief-stricken mother. The third was always a father, bludgeoned to death with a hammer, the same tool Arthur used to kill his abusive father as a teen. And then fourth, the hidden kill, would be a young boy, around the same age Arthur was during Vera's death. He would get abducted, dressed in pajamas, made to play with toy trains, and then buried alive in the foundation of a home Arthur was building through his charity. It was a fresh concrete grave hidden beneath suburban dreams. What's particularly haunting about Arthur's ritual is that every time he killed, he would smear Vera's ashes on the wall and position the victim's hand to point directly at it. In the case of the second victim, the mother of 2, he even referred to her as mommy. It was a chilling reminder of just how deeply that childhood trauma has scarred his soul. These details aren't just theatrics. They're evidence of a man who never moved past the pain, who turned grief into obsession and ritualized it through murder. Like many other serial killers, Dexter included, Arthur kept trophies, but unlike Dexter, whose tokens were neatly tucked away, Arthur proudly displayed his on the wall in his living room. Each plaque was an award for his work with 4 walls, 1 heart, but it was also an award for the successful completion of a kill cycle. They were polished, framed symbols of horror masked as civic pride. When Dexter sees the wall of plaques, it's more than a discovery, it's a revelation. Arthur doesn't just kill, he celebrates it. He's built an entire life, family, charity, routine around the nightmare he never stopped reliving. When talking about Arthur, it is impossible not to talk about his family. His family is a big part of his story. It's what makes him so unique and so attractive to Dexter. For the first 5 episodes of season 4, we see Arthur as a solitary figure. He stalks his victims in silence, speaks to children with an unsettling softness, uses someone else's dog as a prop to worm his way into future victims' lives. After kills, he showers in scalding hot water as a punishment in a high school locker room, and then spends his nights alone in dim motel rooms, drinking, brooding, and unraveling in the shadows. At this point, we all think that what Special Agent Lundy believes is true. Arthur is a classic loner, a ghost, a man who is by all means incapable of human connection, which presumably was the one thing that kept him hidden all this time. But boy, were we all wrong, because at the end of episode 5, Dexter discovers that Arthur isn't alone at all. He has a wife, 2 kids, a house in the suburbs with a lawn, a mailbox, and yes, even a white picket fence. In other words, he has a life, a seemingly normal one. And that is when Dexter thinks that maybe he shouldn't kill Arthur, at least not right away. He could learn from him, contain his evil for a while, and then kill him. Here comes another but. But he was wrong about that one. It's soon discovered that Arthur's family does not live with him. They live under him, and that was the only way for them to survive his evil. His wife, Sally, lives in a state of constant fear, walking on eggshells just to survive the day. His daughter, Rebecca, is trapped in a cage of emotional manipulation, her independence smothered by her father's overbearing control, with his constant inner comparisons to his sister, Vera. His son, Jonah, beaten, silenced, and stripped of all confidence. Arthur didn't just murder strangers. He psychologically gutted the people he was supposed to love. Out of all people related to Arthur Mitchell, Christine Hill was the one who got the worst out of it. She was the one who suffered the most and even did horrible things just to get his praise. But who was she to him? At first, Christine was just a successful Miami journalist whose interest in the Trinity case felt just a little bit too personal. Because it was. Christine was Arthur's biological daughter. Yes, raised apart from him, but she was fully aware of who he was. She spent the whole season trying to earn his love, chased his approval like a ghost she couldn't catch, and he offered her nothing in return. When she killed Frank Lundy and shot Deborah Morgan, it was not out of her own ambition or evil. It was a desperate act of loyalty to her father, whom she just wanted to protect. It was a twisted hope that maybe this time he would look at her and see something worth loving. He didn't. When Christine confessed her actions, Arthur abandoned her with no emotion, no comfort, no explanation. Just silence. And ultimately, she took her own life, unable to deal with what she had done. Christine's story was perhaps one of the most tragic ones in the entire series, because through her we saw that Arthur Mitchell's family man persona wasn't just a disguise, it was a weapon he used against those who cared for him the most. Why did Arthur kill? One part of the reason was the ritual. The other one was control he wanted to have over his past. But instead of therapy, he chose to destroy other people's lives and families. The murders weren't random. They were structured, almost ceremonial. A sick ritual he used to relive the worst moments of his childhood over and over again, as if reenacting them might somehow undo the damage. In his mind, Arthur wasn't just punishing victims, he was punishing himself. But here's the twist. He wasn't finding peace or redemption through those acts. He was feeding the darkness. Each kill reopened old wounds and cemented his trauma even deeper. Underneath, Arthur was a man split in two, guilt-ridden, deeply disassociated from reality, boiling with rage he did not understand. He had narcissistic tendencies, bursts of violent control, and a bottomless wall of emotional repression. He didn't process his shame, he projected it onto strangers, his family, anyone who accidentally touched the pain he kept buried. And the scariest part, he believed what he was doing was all for a reason. And he even waited for God or some other higher force to stop him. But when it didn't, he took it as a sign that what he was doing was justified. And the fact he never got caught for doing it was an approval he desperately needed to continue with his rituals of destroying other people's lives. When Dexter first crossed paths with Arthur, he didn't see just a monster. He saw a possibility. Arthur had a wife, 2 kids, and a respectable job. He was a killer, but one with life. And for someone like Dexter, who had always assumed he was destined to live and die alone, that was intoxicating. Maybe the dark passenger didn't have to come at the expense of love, of family, of normalcy. Maybe he could be both and be successful at it at the same time. But soon he learned that Arthur's life wasn't a blueprint. It was a warning, because while Dexter had Harry's code, a moral system that gave his darkness direction, Arthur had none. He killed innocent people, children, mothers, fathers. His compulsion had no boundaries and no mercy. But Dexter, ever the student, didn't see that, at least not at first. He thought he could shadow Arthur, study him, possibly even learn from him. But Arthur was no amateur. He was a master manipulator, a predator who knew exactly how to mask his cruelty with charm. The cracks started to show early on, but it all finally came crashing down in the episode Hungry Man. In this episode, Dexter, under the alias Kyle Butler, is invited to Arthur's home for Thanksgiving dinner. To a casual observer, this feels normal. Arthur carves the turkey, they say grace, and then everything turns upside down. Jonah stands up to his father, calls him a killer, tells him that he's not grateful to have him, and then Arthur snaps. He attacks Jonah, starts strangling him, causing Dexter to react and show his strength and his own dark passenger. This confirms to Dexter that those people are not Arthur's family, they're his hostages. Dexter watches horrified, and the truth hits him hard. This is a nightmare. And that's the moment Dexter finally sees Arthur Mitchell for who he truly is. Not a man who balanced light and dark, but a man completely consumed by it. You see, Dexter himself has always wrestled with 2 identities. First, the killer who needs to feed his dark passenger, and second, the man who wants to be a good husband and a good father. Arthur made him believe these 2 things could coexist in peace. He could keep them separate forever, but this dinner proved that Arthur didn't manage both lives. He suffocated his family with fear while satisfying his killer urges. It redefines Dexter's mission. He no longer sees Arthur as a mentor or curiosity. He finally saw Arthur as a threat that needed to be eliminated as soon as possible. In front of him was a monster wearing the same mask as Dexter. Only Arthur let the monster take over everything. At this point, Dexter let Arthur live for too long. The aftermath of his twisted cat and mouse game with Arthur Mitchell isn't just bloody, it's transformative. For the first time in the series, Dexter meets someone who doesn't just challenge his code, but utterly dismantles the illusion that he can control his double life. Arthur isn't just another target. He's a mirror, and what Dexter sees in that reflection leaves a scar he never recovers from. Throughout season 4, Dexter toys with Arthur, studies him, and underestimates him, believing he's always one step ahead. But in the end, Arthur outplays him, not with brute force, but by slipping into Dexter's real life and delivering the most devastating blow imaginable, the murder of Rita, Dexter's wife. This one act obliterates Dexter's belief that he can keep his 2 worlds separate, that he can be both a killer and a father, a monster and a man. Rita's death isn't just a plot twist, it's a moral reckoning. From that moment forward, Dexter is emotionally hollowed out. His sense of control is shattered, his judgment is frayed, and the consequences ripple far beyond season 4. Astor and Cody, Rita's children, lose their innocence. And Harrison, a baby soaked in his mother's blood, is marked as the next potential inheritor of darkness. That image of Harrison crying on the bathroom floor becomes the ghost Dexter can never outrun. Arthur's Mitchell legacy isn't just a body count, which was sizable of course. It's psychological erosion, which forces Dexter into a spiral of guilt, detachment, and desperation. In later seasons, you can see the change. Dexter becomes more reckless, less tethered to Harry's code, more willing to indulge his urges without considering collateral damage. The careful balance he once maintained crumbles, and by the time we reach Dexter New Blood, it's clear he never truly recovered. The entire premise of the miniseries is built on the emotional fallout of Arthur's final move. Dexter, now hiding under the name Jim Lindsay, has cut himself off from everyone, convinced that his presence only brings death, but fate doesn't let him escape. Harrison resurfaces, and with him, all the guilt and fear Dexter buried a decade earlier. The tension between Dexter and Harrison is charged with Arthur's ghost. Harrison has read about Rita's death. He has nightmares about it. He wants answers, and Dexter can't give them. Not really. Because how do you explain your child that the man who killed his mother was allowed to live long enough to do so? Arthur's impact defines the fractured bond between a father and a son. And in the final episode of New Blood, when Dexter is finally forced to confront who he truly is, not who he wants to be, it's Harrison who delivers the justice Dexter has always evaded. It's not the law or another serial killer. It's the boy born in blood, shaped by Arthur's final kill, who becomes the one to end the cycle. Arthur Mitchell may have died in season 4, but what he broke inside Dexter lived on. In conclusion, Arthur Mitchell was a lot of things. He was a killer, a family man, a builder of homes, a destroyer of homes, a reflection, a warning. He wasn't just Dexter's enemy, he was Dexter's destiny if Dexter ever lost control. And that's what makes him so terrifying. He's not chaos in the form of a madman. He's order twisted into something unrecognizably evil. He's the reminder that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones who look like they have it all together, who smile, who wave at their neighbors, who build houses by day and bury children by night. So next time someone says you never really know a person, think of Arthur Mitchell and maybe double check the foundation of the house that you just bought. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Dexter's darkest villain, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. I will see you in the next video, and remember, appearances can kill.